What's good? What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Urban Platform Speaks. Make sure to like and subscribe as you come into the channel and check out the content. And with that being said, I want to speak on a recent interview that Cree Summers did. Right, Cree Summers. When I was coming up, she was on a show, A Different World. She was, you'll see her on the left hand side. This is her when she was young. She was on there, A Different World. That's where I know her from, Cree Summers. And so she recently did an interview on the show called let me see what's the name of this lady's show. I thought it was a good interview, and the interview was very it was it kind of told a lot about like how some people just they kind of like when it comes to relationships, they kind of like they kind of sabotage themselves basically when it comes to relationships and stuff like that, and them being able to maintain a relationship. Um, and on the show, like when I first saw her picture, I didn't even recognize, Cree Summers because she didn't look the same way as she did when she was younger and when she was on A Different World. But I listened to the interview, and it was a lot. It was a lot. But my main takeaway from this interview is that she was always, she blamed men a lot for her not being able to, be in the right relationship. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play a couple clips, the audio clips of some of her statements in there, and then I'm gonna just give my opinion, because I believe that in order to have a successful relationship, I think you have to make certain sacrifices. Just like you would make sacrifices when it came to like your job and your career, or going to school. Whatever you want to have or accomplish, you need to be able to make sacrifices in order to have that. And it seems like when it comes to relationships, a lot of women like certain sacrifices. Women are not um they're not willing to make, and you can't really have you can't have both. A lot of times, you can have one at one time or maybe and the other at another time, but you can't really have both. It's like trying to go take two different paths. Once you commit to one path, then you basically have to accept the consequences, good or bad, that come from it going down whatever path you choose. But when you whatever path you choose is you still, you gotta accept that. You can't make excuses for that. And then so that's what I got a lot of like some of her statements to me just seemed like kind of delusional. And I'm not really trying to judge, right? I'm just thinking that like for younger women who may think that they don't want to end up like somebody like Cree Summers, you can't listen to Cree Summers, because to her, she really thinks that she has things thought out. She really thinks that she have the situation figured out. But she said she kind of sound like kind of like I said, for lack of a better word, kind of sound like delusional, or like she's like not being honest with herself. And I think it's almost like a person being like, say, like if you're a castaway on an island by yourself. If you're a castaway, you don't you start to even I don't care how intelligent you consider yourself to be, a castaway on an island. After you've been there on that island for a while, you start to get delusional, because people need other people, and be able to bounce ideas off of other people. You need to be able to interact with other people. And so when you choose to go through life alone, then you're almost like a castaway. Even though you surrounded with a lot of people, you can still be like a castaway on an island by yourself, because mainly everything and all your judgment is coming from like inside your head, but you don't have like somebody else to counteract your thoughts. So it's just like being on an island by yourself. So with that being said, I'm gonna listen to like this first clip of Cree. This first piece of audio is Cree speaking about vanity, right? And I think that that was important. Her speaking about vanity, like when she was young.
A freedom now that I never had as a, not even in my 40s. And I think I don't care anymore. This is such a dangerous town sometimes with the beauty ideals and not allowed to be old. And I spent a lot of my time being hemmed up in vanity. And now that I really can't be, I'm the second half of my life. And now I don't care so much about what it looks like.
What are you talking about? You're still hemmed up in vanity. You're dripped out.
You know
gorgeous.
what I mean. I just mean in the sense that I used to think maybe my clothes come off and everything has to be perfect.
Understood.
And now.
So, all right. So she spoke about vanity. She's 55 years old, right? And I think that's where a lot of women go wrong. Like when they're young and they look good. Like she looked good when she was young, and that was the time. Believe it or not, people use their youth and if in the wrong way. So when you're young, that's the time to secure a man and be in a relationship where somebody is going to appreciate you later on when you do turn 55 and everything is not in the same place that it was when you was 25. So it's like you go through these steps in life, and as you go through them, you want to be able to you learn lessons, but it's almost like you're building up equity. And so the equity that you built in a relationship like through the years, by the time you get 25 or 55, the only person who really could appreciate her would be the man that she was with for her life. Like at 55, she's not going to be able to get with a, well, I ain't gonna say not be able to, but it'll be harder to get with somebody at 55 and have him to look at you the same way he looked at somebody when they was 25, because you don't look the same. It's not that same appeal. But if she had maintained a relationship with somebody all of that time, then the man that she was with would appreciate her, because now she brought so much more to the table than just her physical her physical look. And so let me see if she even speak about that.
I'm 55, you really can't, it is where it is. I've nursed 2 babies and
wow.
Right. See, so if you 55, you nurse 2 babies, but she not with the man that she had those babies with. So he don't appreciate the fact that she nursed 2 babies and she don't look the same way that she did when she was she's 25. And so that's what I'm saying. So that equity in a relationship is earned. And that means that it would have paid off when she's 55, because that man appreciate her because of all the years that they had been together. And so I thought that it was important to bring that part up too, about the vanity, because some people just think that they're going to be young, forever, and they're going to look the same way, they did when they were 25, or they'll try to have some type of surgery and stuff like that to enhance themselves. But, life don't work that way, and so that's, when the beauty fade, that's the result. So I'm going to fast forward this a little bit more. And so I can catch another point that she made that I wanted to speak on.
If you have a 700 plus credit score,
I don't have no 700 credit score. All right.
More invisible the older you get as a woman, unfortunately.
It's not to say that it's.
All right, let me see. Yeah, because I thought this was important too, right? What is that? That's 825. So she spoke about how women are invisible at a certain age, or they feel.
So it's weird to not be seen as much. you know, you do become a little more invisible the older you get as a woman, unfortunately.
It's not to say that it's fantastic to be sexually
To be all
harassed.
golden sexualized.
Correct,
No, it's
exactly.
not that.
Yeah. But you do notice when the gaze shifts, and there is a mourning that has to come with that.
It's a juice you get. I remember you could walk into a Starbucks, you know, and all the men would be going, checking you out. And then you walk into a Starbucks and you're not getting that same hit, you know, and you do kind of go, you know, and then you realize that that juice and that feeling that you get from being seen as beautiful, you have to self-generate.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Do you think there's a relationship between feeling more beautiful, feeling more free, feeling more sexy, more sexually open, and then not having that based on what other people give to you, but what you know for yourself?
Oh, as a girl, it was completely dependent upon the male gaze. And now it's dependent upon my gaze.
Mm.
All right. Again, my point is, now she says that at 55, you know, men don't look at her the same way that they did when she was 25, when she was younger. And so women they kind of like fool themselves into thinking about, now that I'm older, it's not about like how men see me, it's about how I see myself, right? And to a certain extent, that might be true. But if you want to be, again, if she wanted to be seen, you know, in the same way, that's you earn all of that through when you're younger. Again, and so if had she been in a relationship, then she would have been you can be appreciated by the person that you're in a relationship with, you know. But when you can't maintain a relationship, then those are the results of you know, you do become invisible, because there are a whole lot of other younger women out there who you know, who get the attention just like she did when she was young, you know. And so, you know, I just thought it was important to touch on that. And what I want to do, something else she was talking about when she talked, she said something about her father, and this is at the 14:10 mark. She said something about her father doing this podcast, and I thought that was kind of telling too, about as far as like her relationships and stuff like this. And so here we go with her relationship with her father.
Let's start with my old man, my father, whose name was Iron Buffalo, right? To give you some insight as to how alpha he was. My parents met in the 60s, and when I was born, they dropped out of society completely. And they went to live on a reservation with the Plains Cree Indians in Saskatchewan called Red Pheasant. And we stayed there for 6.5 years. And then we lived nomadic in a school bus. And we found ourselves in horse stables. We lived in an abandoned boxcar that was on a railway track. We just lived all kinds of ways in teepees, and we didn't have a lot of money because nobody was working real jobs. And I remember, you know, you pull up to a gas station and there'd be no money for gas. And my father would delight in these circumstances. He had this, where are we going to get gas? Watch your daddy get gas, Cree Summer. And then I would watch him barefoot, two braids in his hat, saunter up, excited, and say, "These signs, I could paint the hell out of these signs for you." And then he'd say, "Look at my bus." The school bus we lived in was beautifully decorated. He painted the shit out of it. And before I know it, he'd have painted the signs. We'd have gas and be invited over for dinner. So there was something of also even doing homework in school. I'd make a mistake and he'd say, "Oh,
no offense, but if you're paying
I
more
want to
than
stop it right there real quick, because I just think that, so basically growing up, you know, like they had you heard us, you know, they didn't have a lot of money. Her father didn't work like a steady job or anything like that. So with that being said, you know, that was the lifestyle that they had. But that relationship between her and her father, because it was her father, she kind of just like, you know, she accepted it. You know, it is what it is. But when it came to men in her life, like a man in her life would not have been able to like her life partner would not have been able to get away with the things that like her father did, right? And so part of the reason why, and it's she gonna touch on it. Part of the reason why in her life she is like have a certain amount of masculinity and she likes to take charge is because of like how unstable her father was as far as like when it came to being able to provide and hold down a job and have her and her mother live in a more stable environment, and so instead of being honest with herself about her father, she really transferred that onto the men that came later on down the line in her life, but while she just like romanticized her father, and so let me get back into some more of her conversation about her father and growing up.
Report had a tree instead of a T right there. And he would just get so delighted about it. So mistakes were a thing to go, what's going to happen? Or we don't have money to sleep here. What are we going to do? And I love that as a girl. I never felt like we're fucked or, oh my God. And also, and you also have to consider that I was in precarious, extreme situations and never felt like, oh no. So then you fast forward to having a man. And also the fact that I became completely financially independent.
Yeah. I'm just curious about your mom.
Yeah.
Because some people can be the counter to that.
Yeah. Oh, she delighted in it too.
I love that.
Because you've got to think that they met, both of them, the trajectory for their careers. He was the star of Francis Ford Coppola's first film, Fred Astaire's last film. And my mother was dancing in the chorus. She was dating Hugh Masekela and Dennis Hopper at the time. What a player. And anyway, she fell in love with my old man and followed this old dusty hippie into this life she never imagined for herself. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine his magic had to be so profound that she.
See how she romanticized her father, but again, and she get ready to start talking about the men in her life, but she would that same behavior, like with the men in her life, she would not accept that. Whereas though she romanticized her father, but the men in her life, she blamed them for not being able to, to meet her standards or make things in her life right. And let me play her.
Trusted it, and then I in turn trusted it.
Yeah,
and I moved to LA at 16, and then I turned 17 a couple months later, and 6 months later I was on Different Worlds. So I've always been ferociously independent. And when the men in my life,
let me stop it right there and see the reason why she felt like she needed to be independent is because, again, like her father was somebody who was not really they were kind of like hippies, and like that's the same type of role she played when she was on that show back in the day, Different World. She was sort of like a pro-black hippie, and so that role really fit her. I mean, it was like a real life role for her.
Expressed a fear of if we were going to be okay. I really had a visceral reaction to it. It took away my sex. Instantly, it would take away my sex. And something so extremely unattractive about. I have to be careful here because I don't want anyone to get the impression that I don't respect uncertainty or fear. Those are real things. Something about the approach to it that I don't want anyone to make me feel unsafe.
Yes.
If you're feeling unsafe, we can talk about it and investigate it together.
What she don't realize that like a certain amount of fear and a certain amount of paranoia is healthy, right? So she said that men that, because like I said, she grew up in a home where it was like unstable and, it just was unstable. And so if she encountered a man that took life seriously and he was, he was like, oh, what we going to do? This is a situation where, we don't want to be in. And so she said that turned her off. Whereas, because whereas though the man wanted to, he wanted to map out a plan of what was going to be their next move. Whereas though her father was more so of a laid back, easygoing kind of guy, a free spirit, and he just took it as it came. And she was so masculine because she felt like she needed to take control because of how she grew up, and she was not able to allow a man to really just take charge and be a man. And so that's why her relationships didn't work, but she didn't realize that she could, that it would have been good for her to work with somebody instead of trying to take everything on her own. And so let me get back to a little bit more of what she's talking about.
I don't want it to become my fear too, because I don't approach it that way. And it really has been the demise of some pretty long-term things in my life. Yeah.
Feeling
I just-
lonely
I
and
just
looking for a
think that,
significant someone, but
I just think that with her, I just think that, like I said, she really just made a whole lot of excuses for with our relationships. And then the fact that if she wanted to be in a relationship, like she blew the relationships that she was in. And that's why she found herself at 55, just trying to really convince herself that it was not her, that, it was the men in her life. She said she later on, I don't know if I can find this, but she did say that, she felt like if she was in a relationship that she couldn't really be herself because the men didn't allow her to be herself. And I just think that, again, it's just more and more excuses. And so my reason for reacting to this video is just to, like, for younger women, you only way to you gotta the only way to get it is by doing it. You just have to go through the process. If you don't want to be in a type of situation that she's in, like at 55 years old, um, and she go on to talking about like what kind of relationship that she want now and what she want men to do to her and stuff like that. But it's a process. You have to, like I said, the only way to get it is to go through that whole process. And she didn't do that. And so that's why it's like residuals, like you work 2 weeks and then you get paid, that following week. But you're getting paid now for the work that you did 2 weeks ago. And then if you continue to work, you're in another 2 weeks, you'll pick up another check. And that's how life works. You gotta build up, it's a residual effect. And you're building up equity along the way, in relationships. But I don't know, just people just think that all of this stuff is just going to magically work itself out, and it'll magically work itself out, and then everything will just fall into place. But situations don't work like that. Like I said, you have to work your way through these situations. And when you have single women like Cree Summers and a lot of other women who are not in relationships talking like that, they sound like they are they can convince themselves that they are intelligent and they know what they're talking about. But you got to look at the results. I think that more married women, not just married women, but women who've been, like, a 55-year-old woman who has been in a relationship for all those years. She's a better person to speak on something like that than somebody like Cree Summers. Very articulate. It sound good, but then you still have to look at the results. She can talk a good game, but you got to look at the results, because if you do what she do, then you are going to get what she got. And I think that's just something that people need to keep in mind. It was a lot to that interview. Um, a lot of, and basically it was just mostly excuses, blaming men about, she couldn't find the right man. And it's millions of men in this country. What is it, like 350 million people in this country, and almost half of them are men. And for you to say that you can't find a man don't make no sense to me. You know, it really don't. And it's a lot of women, and a lot of men say that they can't find women, but it just people need to. I think they need to like reevaluate, like what are they looking for when they look for a man or a woman in their life, because nowhere in the world, you know, it's 350 million people or 175 million people, and you can't find somebody. It just don't make no sense. Um, yeah, and so that's my take on it. But go check out that interview with Cree Summers. I thought it was an interesting interview. I didn't really have time to break down the whole thing, but basically, she just made a whole lot of excuses and convinced herself that she was, you know, there was somebody else's fault. It was never her fault. Only one time throughout that whole video that she, you know, she took any blame for you know, her current state and relationships. But other than that, she didn't take any blame. And so that's my take on it. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a message or comment, and I'll check you all out in the next video. Peace.